following is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
Once a week, for 52 weeks, on the same day of each week, Stephen Lawson climbs to one of his camera wedges to take a photo. Each time he clicks the shutter, he captures only a small fragment of a single panoramic photograph. He approaches photography from his roots as a sculptor. His raw materials are time and space. Some of his works capture a whole year. Some are from dawn to dusk on a single day. Others take only minutes, and some only seconds. He not only uses these elaborate cameras that look more like something Q would build for 007, he also designs and builds the cameras. Originally from Scotland, Lawson began exploring his art form on his own land in West Virginia.
One of the early things I did was tried to make very simple drawings on the hillside across from the house with a flashlight at night, long time exposures on the camera. And I did several things across seasons, and so I needed 4 or 5 shots of the same thing in order to explain it. And then I realized rather than having 4 separate photographs, I could use a quarter of each one and put them side by side, and you'd see the beginning, the middle, and the end, so to speak. And that put the concept in my mind of time-lapse, sequential, cut-strip photographs that I started with. Well, this is, I think, the second, or maybe even the first, I don't remember now, contraption that I made to do the time-lapse day-long panoramas. I could set the little pointer on, for argument's sake, they were on 350, wind, shoot. Then I've got 10 minutes to move it over 5 degrees and be ready 10 minutes later, take the next one, and so on, all day till after sunset. I think the first ones were all at 12-minute intervals, though some were closer, but you wind up with maybe 120 photographs. And you go to the local camera store and you get an 8x10 and give them their $4.95 for it. You go to a custom shop and say you want an 8x10 and they say, okay, that'll be $38. You want 120 of those? So I couldn't stick with those simple things, and I modified a camera that would allow me to take just little strips instead of a whole. Instead of making an 8x10, for example, it made an 8x1. Having arrived at that, realizing I could jam, well, in fact, I think it was 8 strips onto one negative, I realized, well, why not 80? If you just make it accurately enough, in fact, why not put the entire picture on one negative? Then you only need one print instead of 120 of them. And so that led me to trying to make very much more accurate things to where I could stack all of these up. Once I got to that idea of stacking up all these little strips all in one negative, the strip got down to a 1/2 degree wide, which is sort of like half the thickness of a matchstick inside the camera. And I realized, in fact, if you could move the film while you were turning the camera, and that sort of brought me to putting a little electric motor on to pull the film through and just leaving the shutter open. And that allowed me to get a very long time panorama, like day long from one side to the other. When this little motor drives the film around, it's pulling the film onto the take-up knob, and this is the little slot that exposes the light onto the film. So rather than taking a frame this wide, it's just taking this pencil-thin line, and the film creeps past it very, very, very slowly. A 10-inch piece of film had to cover maybe 14 hours from one side to the other. So the little electric motors I added, they had to be geared down a long, long way. And I had to put a lot of neutral density out front to reduce the light coming in, otherwise it would just completely overexpose, having the shutter open all day long. The ones that are motorized, there's no interval, and so the motion of clouds or wind shaking trees or waves coming up on a pond or something like that, the transition from one state to the other is, well, obviously it's not abrupt, and so it's much more subtle. Other ideas suddenly came in, and you realize instead of having the thing on a turntable, I could bolt it on the roof of my car and drive through town. Then I realized, well, why bolt it to the roof? Why not just hold it in your hand and walk down the street? And when I tried that, I suddenly realized that, and from driving, that if you go too fast, everything gets squished up. If you go too slowly, everything gets stretched out. And so, my movement became part of the movement that was happening on the other side. So that means one doesn't have to hold it flat. It would mean I could rotate, I could point it at my feet, I could point it across, I could point it up. And that sort of took me away from landscape, if you like, into townscape, and then to working with people. This was the first dance piece I did, and I had asked him if he'd move from one side of the room to the other, trying to stay in front of the camera as it rotated. And this was what he did and made up as he went along, this funny sort of shuffling motion that he did with his feet and his blue pants. I just call this one Blue Donuts as a mnemonic. But I like the abstractness of his form and the way, with his body movement, he just keeps appearing and reappearing from one side of the room to the other. Made me think forward to other more complex things I could do once I understood the principle of it.
Lawson shows no favorites among his various cameras and continues to use them all. The largest commitment is the decision to make a year-long photograph, since he must dedicate one whole camera for 1 year for a single photograph, and construction of each camera takes more than a few months. It's a rare person who is both inventor and artist. Since Steve Lawson is the only person in the world to have access to these one-of-a-kind cameras, he explores their aesthetic potential alone. That feeling of being alone is probably most profound when Lawson takes a day-long photograph.
If you stand there for an entire day from first light till last light in the same place, just watching the day occur, I don't know if it's a form of meditation. I've never really thought of it in that sense, but it's surprising what does happen to your mind. I think very, very few people across the entire country could possibly stand in one place all day long and just look out at the same view. I mean, even the most rabid environmentalist, I think they would probably get bored after a couple hours.